Christmas morning is supposed to begin with light, with quiet joy, with hope wrapped in small moments. Across the world, this day is known as a pause from suffering, a reminder that love still exists, that miracles are possible. For some, Christmas did not arrive with warmth. It arrived with a decision made behind closed doors, a decision that would destroy a life before the sun fully rose. On this Christmas morning, there were no gifts for her, no carols, no mercy, only footsteps, only voices that did not ask permission, only the sound of something precious being taken away forever. This is not a holiday story you were taught. This is not a version written in textbooks. This is the side of Christmas that power tried to bury. Because while the world celebrated peace and goodwill, a mother was forced to watch her child become property, sold, removed, erased from her arms as if love could be priced and traded. What happened next was not sudden madness. It was not blind rage. It was the result of years of silence, years of fear, years of knowing that no one was coming to save her. In this video you will learn how Christmas was used as a mask, a day that appeared kind on the surface, while cruelty continued underneath. You will learn how systems of power relied on tradition and celebration to distract from injustice, how joy for some was built on the suffering of others, and most importantly you will understand why this story is not just about loss, it is about awakening. Because when someone has nothing left to lose, fear stops working. What makes this story different is not just what was taken from her, it is what was awakened inside her that same morning. A quiet strength, a dangerous clarity, a realization that obedience had never protected her. By the time night fell, the world she had been forced to survive in no longer felt untouchable. This story matters because it exposes a truth many still avoid, that extreme injustice creates moments of extreme choice, that pain, when ignored long enough, does not disappear. It transforms. If you stay until the end of this video, you will see how one Christmas morning changed everything, not just for her, but for how we understand resistance, memory, and human dignity. This is a story about a mother, about a system that believed it was permanent, and about the night that proved it was not. Stay with us, because this is not just history. This is a warning. Before we talk about the moment that changed everything, we must understand where she stood in the world she was born into. Not as a person in the eyes of the system, but as property. Her existence was measured in labor, not in life. Every morning began the same way. Orders were given, work was expected, obedience was demanded, and silence was enforced. She had no legal name that mattered, no record that protected her, no voice that could challenge a decision. In the plantation system, her body belonged to others, her time belonged to others, even her pain belonged to others. She was expected to endure without complaint, to bend without breaking, and to accept that suffering was simply part of breathing. Before we talk about the loss that shattered her, we need to see how powerless she truly was. She could not choose where she lived. She could not choose when she rested. She could not choose who touched her life or when. Every rule was written to benefit someone else. Every punishment existed to remind her of her place. There were no rights she could claim, no authority she could appeal to. If something was taken from her, it was gone. If something was done to her, it was final. The system was designed this way on purpose. Power flowed in one direction only, downward, crushing everything beneath it. Before we talk about the fire, we must talk about the fear. Fear was everywhere. It lived in whispers. It lived in careful movements. It lived in the way people avoided eye contact. One wrong look could bring punishment. One moment of hesitation could bring pain. Survival meant staying invisible. It meant learning when not to speak. It meant enduring things no human should endure. Protection did not exist for her. The same people who made the rules enforced them. The same hands that claimed ownership decided guilt. Justice was not blind. It was selective, and it was never on her side. Before we talk about resistance, we must understand endurance. She endured hunger. She endured exhaustion. She endured watching others disappear without explanation. She endured knowing that tomorrow would look exactly like today, and the day after that would be no different. Hope was dangerous in that world. Hope could make you careless. Hope could make you dream, and dreams could get you punished. So she learned to survive instead. To move forward quietly, to protect what little she had by saying nothing at all. This was her position in the plantation system, not weak but restrained, Not ignorant, but trapped. Not invisible, but deliberately ignored. A life reduced to function, a human reduced to silence. And yet beneath that silence, something remained awake. In a world designed to strip her of everything, the child became the one thing that could not be taken from her heart. From the moment she felt life grow inside her, something shifted. The days were still hard. The work was still endless. The cruelty did not stop. But there was now a reason to endure it all. The baby was not just a child. The baby was proof that something pure could exist in a place built on suffering. When she held that small body close, the noise of the plantation faded, if only for a moment. In those quiet moments, she was no longer just surviving. She was protecting. She was nurturing. She was loving in a world that tried to make love impossible. Every breath the baby took gave her strength. Every small movement reminded her that her life had meaning beyond labor and obedience. The system told her she was replaceable. The child told her she was essential. The system tried to erase her identity. The child gave her one. She began to measure time differently. Not by sunrise and sunset, not by orders and punishments, but by the baby's needs. Hunger meant something new now. Exhaustion carried purpose. Pain was endured with a quiet promise whispered inside her heart. As long as the child was safe, she could bear anything. The baby became her secret rebellion. Loving fiercely in a place that demanded numbness was an act of resistance. Singing softly when no one was listening was an act of courage. Holding hope in her arms was dangerous, but she did it anyway. Motherhood gave her something the plantation could not control. They could control her body. They could control her time. But they could not control the way her heart wrapped itself around that child. In those moments she was not owned, she was whole. Hope did not exist in grand dreams of freedom. It existed in small fragile moments. In the way the baby's fingers curled around hers. In the way the child's breathing slowed against her chest. These moments became sacred. They were hers. Even if the world said nothing belonged to her, she began to imagine a future. Not for herself, but for the child. A future where pain was not inherited. A future where chains did not decide worth. These thoughts were dangerous, yet impossible to stop. Once hope enters, it refuses to leave quietly. In a cruel world, motherhood became her anchor. It gave shape to her endurance. It gave purpose to her suffering. The baby was not just a reason to live. The baby was the reason she refused to disappear. Holidays were presented as proof of kindness. A brief pause, they said. A moment of generosity. A reminder that the system had a heart. On the surface, everything looked softer during these days. Work slowed slightly. Voices sounded lighter. Smiles appeared where fear usually lived. To outsiders, it looked humane. Almost gentle. But this softness was carefully staged. It was not mercy. It was performance. A controlled display meant to reassure consciences and protect reputations. The structure of cruelty never changed. It simply wore a different mask for a day. Small allowances were granted. A little extra food. A short break from labor. Maybe a hymn. Maybe a prayer. These moments were meant to suggest compassion, yet they only highlighted how little was ever given. When a system must advertise its kindness, it is usually hiding something darker underneath. For those in power, holidays became a way to feel good without giving up control. They could claim tradition. They could claim generosity. They could tell themselves they were not cruel people. All while ownership, violence and separation continued without pause. Joy flowed in one direction, upward. Comfort belonged to those who already had everything. Laughter echoed from houses built on stolen labor. Tables were filled while hunger still waited nearby. Celebration existed, but it was uneven. It always was. For her the holiday did not erase fear. It sharpened it. Because holidays were also moments when decisions were made quietly. Transactions hidden behind festive noise. While attention was elsewhere. Lives could be rearranged without resistance. Pain could be delivered discreetly. The appearance of humanity made the brutality worse. Because it confused hope. It made people believe kindness was possible, only to take it away again. It trained silence. It taught endurance through disappointment. Holidays were not breaks from suffering. They were reminders of power, a reminder that mercy was optional, that joy could be given and taken at will, that even sacred days belonged to those who ruled. Songs played, but they did not change the rules. Prayers were spoken, but they did not protect families. Smiles appeared, but they did not stop separation. The system remained intact, only the lighting changed. What hurt most was not the lack of joy, it was the contrast. Watching happiness exist so close, yet so unreachable. Watching warmth pass by without stopping. Watching celebration become another tool of control. In this world, holidays did not bring peace. They exposed the imbalance. They showed who was allowed to rest and who was expected to endure, who could celebrate freely and who paid the price for that celebration. Joy for some was made possible by silence from others, and silence, over time, becomes unbearable. The decision was made without her presence. That is how it always happened. Papers were signed, words were exchanged, prices were agreed upon. All of it took place far away from her voice, as if her love did not exist, as if her child was an object to be moved from one place to another. There was no warning, no preparation, no moment to understand what was coming. The morning began like any other, until it didn't, until unfamiliar footsteps slowed near her space, until the air shifted, until instinct told her something was wrong. The baby was spoken about, not spoken to, measured, judged, reduced to value, age, strength, potential. The language of ownership erased every trace of humanity. In that system, children were not born, they were acquired. She was not asked, she was not informed. Consent was never part of the process. Mothers were expected to accept loss the same way they accepted labor, quietly, without resistance, without breaking. When she realized what was happening, her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She held tighter, she pleaded, she begged with words that came from a place deeper than fear. But the rules did not bend for emotion, they never had. Her cries filled the space, raw and uncontrollable. They carried pain, memory, and desperation, but they changed nothing. The people who enforced the decision had learned how to ignore sounds like that. To them it was noise. To her, it was the sound of her world collapsing. Hands reached in, not gently, not patiently. The baby was taken as if separating flesh from flesh was routine, as if love could be pulled apart without consequence. The child cried too, sensing danger without understanding it. Time slowed. Each second stretched into something unbearable. She watched distance form where closeness once lived. She watched arms that had held safety, now hold emptiness. No explanation was offered. None was required. The sale was clean, efficient, final. That was the cruelty of it. No dramatic announcement, no hesitation, just removal, just loss, just silence. Afterward, she stood there, surrounded by people, yet completely alone. The baby's absence was louder than any scream. The space where warmth had been felt moments before now felt cold and hollow. In that moment, something inside her learned a terrible truth. That love did not protect, that motherhood did not grant mercy, that the system was willing to take even the last thing that gave her strength. And once that truth settled in, the world she had been surviving in no longer made sense the same way. At first there was no scream, no movement, no reaction anyone could point to. Shock does not arrive loudly, it arrives by emptying everything at once. Her body remained standing, but her mind drifted somewhere far away. The world continued to move around her, yet she felt removed from it, as if a wall had dropped between her and reality. Sounds became dull, faces blurred, words lost meaning. The place where her child had been moments ago felt unreal, like a memory already fading. She looked down at her arms, still shaped to hold something that was no longer there. The weight was gone, but the ache remained. Shock settled in like a heavy fog. It slowed time. It numbed pain just enough to survive it. This was how the body protected itself, by shutting down, by refusing to feel all of it at once. People expected noise. They expected hysteria. They expected collapse to look dramatic. But what they saw instead was stillness. Her breathing evened out. Her face went quiet. Her eyes stopped searching. Silence wrapped itself around her like armor. That silence was mistaken for acceptance. It often is. Those watching believed the moment had passed, that she had returned to obedience, that loss had been absorbed the way it always was. But silence does not mean peace. Sometimes it means everything is being gathered inside. Inside that quiet, memories rushed in. The baby's warmth, the small sounds, the way her life had revolved around that fragile presence. Each memory landed like a blow, yet she did not flinch. She let them stack one by one, pressing down, reshaping something deep within her. The silence grew heavier. It was no longer numbness. It became focus. Her breathing slowed not because she was calm, but because something inside her had sharpened. The fog began to lift. In that stillness she saw the truth clearly for the first time. Nothing she had done to survive had protected her. Compliance had not saved her child. Endurance had not earned mercy. Silence had only delayed the inevitable. That realization hurt more than the loss itself, because it stripped away the last illusion she had relied on. The belief that if she endured quietly, she would be allowed to keep what she loved. Her silence deepened, but its nature changed. It was no longer hollow. It became deliberate. Every movement slowed. Every thought narrowed. Fear, which had ruled her for so long, began to loosen its grip. Resolve does not announce itself. It forms quietly. It takes shape in the moments when grief stops asking why, and starts asking what. Her posture changed. Slightly, almost unnoticeably, but inside something had shifted direction. The silence was no longer submission. It was decision. And once that decision settled, there was no turning back. Child separation was never random. It was calculated. It was used as a warning written into daily life. Everyone understood it, even if no one spoke about it openly. Love was allowed only until it became inconvenient. Attachment was tolerated only until it created strength. Then it was taken away. Breaking families was one of the most effective tools of control. It reached deeper than chains ever could. When people feared losing their children, they learned obedience quickly. When mothers knew that love could be punished, they learned silence. The threat did not need to be spoken. It lived in memory. It lived in what had already happened to others. Children were leverage. Their bodies became bargaining chips. Their futures became currency. By separating families, the system reminded everyone who held power, not just over labor but over bloodlines, over identity, over the most basic human bonds. This cruelty served a purpose. People who are grieving are easier to manage. People who are afraid are less likely to resist. When your heart is broken, survival becomes your only goal. Justice feels distant. Freedom feels impossible. For many, the pain was carried quietly. Tears were swallowed. Names were remembered in silence. Stories were never told because telling them meant reopening wounds that never truly healed. The system depended on this quiet suffering. It depended on pain staying private. Her pain was not unique. That is what makes it unbearable. It echoed the experiences of countless others whose stories were never recorded. Mothers who watched children disappear down dusty roads. Fathers who never saw their sons again. Families erased in pieces, one separation at a time. Each separation sent a message to everyone watching. This can happen to you. This will happen again. Obedience might delay it, but nothing will stop it. That message kept people in line more effectively than any guard or weapon. What made this tactic so powerful was its intimacy. It attacked the heart, not the body. It turned love into vulnerability. It taught people that caring deeply was dangerous. Her grief carried the weight of all that history. It was personal, yet collective. A single moment that reflected a system built on countless similar moments. Her cries were not just for one child. They were for every bond that had been deliberately destroyed. This is why her pain mattered. Because it was evidence. Evidence that the system knew exactly what it was doing. That cruelty was not accidental. It was strategic. And when pain is repeated long enough, across generations, it does not simply disappear. It waits. It gathers. It looks for a moment when silence is no longer possible. For years, fear had been her constant companion. It dictated every step she took, every word she spoke, every glance she cast. Fear was invisible, but it weighed heavily. It had taught her caution, patience, and silence. It had kept her alive, but it had also kept her powerless. But something changed that morning. The loss of her child was so absolute, so final, that the rules of fear no longer applied. There was nothing left to lose. When fear cannot take away more, it loses its power. Suddenly, what had always seemed impossible began to feel within reach. The helplessness that had defined her existence began to crack. The hours spent bowing, watching, waiting, and enduring no longer felt like protection. They felt like chains. The system had taken much, but it had not yet taken her resolve. That resolve had been quiet, buried under years of survival, but it was still there, ready to rise. Her body reacted differently now. Movements were sharper, breathing steadier, eyes clearer. Where fear had once dictated hesitation, determination now dictated action. Every instinct that had kept her alive in silence was replaced by instincts that demanded justice. Pain became fuel, anger became direction, loss became strategy. This was not a sudden eruption of violence. It was a careful awakening. She measured what was around her, understood the stakes, and yet refused to let them dictate her next move. There was no panic. There was no despair, only clarity. A clarity that came from recognizing that the system had already failed to protect what mattered most. Fear had ruled her for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to act freely. And in that moment, as the world continued without noticing her, she remembered. She remembered that she could choose, that she could decide, that she could reclaim even the smallest fragment of agency. The loss, terrible as it was, became a catalyst. The chains that had been forged through years of obedience, through the quiet endurance of injustice, were shattered by grief. The very thing meant to break her became the key to her strength. What had been held hostage in silence was now being unleashed in resolve. Agency is a quiet but powerful force. It begins as a thought, a refusal to remain passive. Then it becomes movement, and finally, it becomes action. And in that quiet moment after the unimaginable loss, she experienced it fully for the first time. She was no longer subject to fear. She was no longer constrained by the rules imposed on her. She was alive in a way she had never been before. The shift was complete. The helplessness that had defined her life was gone. In its place stood someone fully awake, someone who had been forged by suffering, but not defeated by it. Someone whose grief had become the foundation of power. And in that power, the first true sense of freedom revealed itself. The freedom to act, the freedom to resist, the freedom to reclaim even the smallest fragment of what had been stolen. The plantation was never just a piece of land. It was never just a collection of buildings or fences. To those who lived under its shadow, it represented a system designed to control every part of life. Every tree, every field, every house carried the weight of ownership, not of humanity. It was a landscape built to contain bodies and minds, to extract labor while erasing identity. To the people forced to endure it, the plantation was a constant reminder of their place in the world. The houses symbolized authority, the fences symbolized confinement, the fields symbolized endless labor without reward. Every structure, every path, every corner held memory of pain, memory of loss, memory of oppression. The plantation was not neutral. It was active. It imposed rules, measured compliance, and punished resistance. Its wealth was built on suffering. Every crop harvested, every profit earned, was inseparable from the toil, fear, and anguish of those who labored there. The plantation's beauty to outsiders masked brutality inside. The grandeur of its buildings was a shield for cruelty. The smiles of the owners concealed the cries of the oppressed. To her, every corner of that land carried the invisible weight of countless injustices, each one leaving scars deeper than the soil could hold. Burning the plantation was never about property. It was never about revenge against walls or fences. It was a statement. It was a refusal. Every flame was an act of rebellion against the system that had claimed her body, her child, and her life. The fire was a way to reclaim power, in a place designed to strip it away. It was a signal that the structures of control could be challenged, that the authority could be defied, that the pain could be acknowledged and transformed into action. The act of destruction carried symbolism far beyond destruction itself. It was an attempt to erase the physical markers of oppression, while asserting a new reality, that human spirit could not be contained. that suffering could produce resistance, and that power, when misused, could be undone. For her the fire was clarity. It burned away the weight of memory, and opened space for agency. Every building that fell to the flames carried the history of countless untold stories, families broken apart, lives erased, hope suppressed, and as the fire spread, it consumed more than wood and nails. It consumed the false sense of permanence that the system had relied on. It reminded her, and anyone who witnessed it, that control was only temporary, that fear only held sway as long as it was unchallenged. The plantation in its essence was a monument to suffering and power, intertwined. It was a physical reminder of a system that placed profit and control above humanity, and in rejecting it, in letting it burn, she rejected every part of that system, every rule, every chain, every calculation that had been used to dictate her life. The fire was not destruction for its own sake. It was the ultimate declaration of autonomy, a refusal to remain silent, and a reclaiming of what had been stolen, in the most profound way possible. The act of burning the plantation was not random. It was not the eruption of blind anger or mindless destruction. It was deliberate. Every step she took, every flicker of flame she allowed to spread, carried intention. It was a message written in smoke and fire, a message that could not be ignored, a statement far louder than any words could convey. In a world that had denied her choice, that had stripped her of rights, that had sold her child, as if love were a commodity, the fire became a language she could speak fluently. It was a language of defiance, a language of truth, a language that declared to anyone watching, and even to those far away, that she still existed as a human being, with feelings, with agency, with an identity no one could erase. The flames were a testament to the endurance of spirit. While her body had been forced into submission, her soul had never been conquered. The act of setting the plantation ablaze was proof that the human heart can respond to injustice in a way that reclaims power. It was not chaos, because there was a plan, there was a purpose, there was clarity. In every movement, every spark was a punctuation mark. Every wall collapsing a sentence in the story she refused to remain silent about. Even if it meant losing everything, she acted. Loss had already touched her in its most devastating form, yet she did not allow despair to dictate the final chapter. The risk of punishment, the certainty of anger from those in power, the possibility of death, all of it mattered less than the declaration she needed to make that she was more than what they had reduced her to, that her humanity could not be stolen. This act carried a dual purpose. On one level, it was revenge. On another, it was proof of life, a message to the world that oppression could not erase love, could not erase grief, and could not erase determination. It was a reminder that even under the harshest systems, the human spirit retains the power to respond with clarity and intention. There is a lesson in this that transcends the event itself. When structures are built on cruelty, when laws favor the powerful over the innocent, there comes a point where the oppressed must speak. And sometimes, words are not enough. Sometimes, action, visible, undeniable, irreversible action, becomes the only truthful form of communication. That fire was her voice. That blaze was her testimony. It was not destruction for destruction's sake. It was not impulsive. It was a deliberate assertion of self in a world that had denied her selfhood. It was proof that humanity exists not just in survival, but in refusal to be erased. And even if she lost everything in the process, the act ensured that she retained what mattered most: dignity, presence, and the undeniable truth of her own being. This story is more than a single act of courage. It is a reminder that justice is not only about laws or systems. It is about recognizing humanity, even when it has been denied. Every flame, every moment of defiance, carries the weight of memory. It connects us to countless others, whose voices were silenced, whose pain was ignored, and whose stories were left untold. Remembering these forgotten voices is essential. Pain that is ignored does not disappear. It lingers, it shapes, and it waits for acknowledgement. By holding their stories in our minds and hearts, we honor their struggle, and ensure that the lessons of the past are not lost. Resistance, even in its quietest,
or most dramatic forms, is proof that humanity cannot be fully conquered. Her actions speak to the power of resilience, to the strength found in standing against oppression, and to the importance of remembering those who endured what we might never imagine. History is shaped not only by those who ruled, but also by those who refused to remain invisible. If this story moved you, like this video, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so you help keep these voices alive, and ensure that more forgotten stories are told.